we invited guests who perhaps have something to say to this topic. So let me introduce them. On my left hand, Petra Vargova-Čakovská, who has come from Poprad. Petra is a project manager of the Association for Consumer Protection, where she deals with the issues of protecting consumers, and she attempts to develop awareness, or spread awareness of this sphere of public life. And in recent months we've been in contact more intensively because Petra is a team member, and also an author, the author of the idea of a project which recently, in recent competition that we titled Restart Slovakia. This project actually got to the final round, and the project was titled Blacklist of Unacceptable Contractual Terms and Conditions, and this project served as a platform for spreading the idea of citizen activism. Petra has graduated in journalism in the Philosophy Faculty of Comenius University in Bratislava. She lived in the UK for some time. Welcome, Petra. Another guest is Eva Vozárová. She's also a graduated journalist. Since she graduated, and also during her studies, she was working in the media. She was working in the Trend magazine. She used to work also at the media server Medialne.sk, and she was dealing for several years with the organizing of the Barcamp events, and at the moment she works as a project manager for technology projects for AFP, so Fair Play Alliance, and these projects are focusing on watchdogging, so basically controlling the execution of power of the public authorities by applying online tools. Another guest is Filip Struhárik. Filip works for SME, the daily newspaper in Slovakia. He's also a graduate in journalism, and during his studies already he was dealing with the issue of blogging and blogs as a means of citizen journalism. He works as a project manager in SME daily for projects of user-generated content type or marketing projects, and also for news. And he also works on the website SME.sk as an editor. In his free time he follows, maybe not just free time, perhaps also work-related things, so he follows the latest trends in the media and online space in general. And another guest who has his space reserved here, but he failed to come yet, is Filip Vagač, who is a government plenipotentiary for development of civil societies. Filip would like to apologize. He should be here in 15 or 20 minutes because at this moment he's giving the awards for voluntary work. The award-giving ceremony is taking place at this very moment, so he would like to apologize, but he will join the discussion later on. Filip is perhaps well known in the field of non-profit organizations or foundations. He before 1989 he used to work as an active student of the independent student organizations, and right after the 1989 he started to organize various associations. He was the first boss of the Youth Council of Slovakia, so the non-communist organization. Later on he established the Children Foundation of Slovakia, and he ran the huge charity projects titled Children's Hour. In the last 2 years he's been working as a government plenipotentiary for development of civil society, and he is responsible for the open government agenda, so basically the program agenda that also the Slovak Republic endorses. Already it was endorsing during the previous government, but also this new government also endorses this agenda, and Filip is basically the person who who's coordinating the task of the government. But we will be speaking about this in greater detail when he comes. And before we start, I'd like to tell you that the program of these discussions is following. The initial part, that will take approximately 45 minutes, perhaps 1 hour, we'll be trying to map out and explore the topic with our guests. And I've already prepared a few questions that would help us to explore this, and in the second part, which will have approximately the same length, will basically be a Q&A sessions where you as an audience could be asking questions. So I hope you will join us and you will participate. And if you participate, you need to speak to the microphone because the discussion is being recorded and it will be available online, whether on the OSF web, www.osf.sk, or through the Facebook profile of the USA and Slovakia, which is operated by the American embassy, and discussion is being interpreted also, and that's just because of the fact that we might have guests who do not speak Slovaks, and therefore we'd like them to be able to join discussion as well. That's why you need to speak to the microphone. So these will be the technical issues, and now we can basically start right. We can get right to the point, and perhaps the first area of questions I'd like to speak about is to define what we're actually speaking about. When we speak about online citizen activism, what is basically online citizen activism in Slovakia, and what we actually understand by this term? Who are these online activists? How they work, and what's the effect of their activism? So, perhaps, Eva, could you start, please? Well, it's a very difficult question to answer right for the start, because Boris, you know very well the structure of Slovak citizen activism. You know how much of it is taking place online and how much is taking place offline, basically. But I'd like to take the question, or to look at the question from a wider perspective. One part of citizen online activism are basically NGOs which were basically active in their respective areas or in their respective agendas for many years, and they found out later on that the internet could be one of the useful means, and they decided to leverage these means, and they're doing their job, or they do their job with greater or smaller effect relatively systematically. And then the second sort of counterpart of this is something that basically was enabled by social networks, like reactions, one-off reactions of people to hot burning issues or topics that appeared, like situations before the elections, where people activate themselves, something that doesn't have a follow-up, basically, something that just remains in the vacuum. However, it still helps to create some sort of awareness of change at that very given moment. And then we have a third category of people that we could perhaps take with a pinch of salt, but as a question, Filip, maybe, that if, for example, we can consider discussions on SME.sk as citizen activism, where people get really activated. The question is, what's the result? However, to make it complete, we need to say that with this whole confusion and ballast that appears on those discussions, there were useful things appearing that help to move on certain causes. So that's my question, perhaps, with passing the microphone to the left. Thank you. Well, it's a very difficult question for the start. I agree with you, Eva. Online activism is a definition. I'm not a theoretician to be able to define it exactly, but activism for me is anything that is basically a component of democracy, as I perceive it. And therefore, it's anything. It can be also discussions on the website .sme.sk. You said these are counterparts between these one-off actions and this continuous work of foundations. I don't see these as counterparts. I see these as separate things, but they are not the counterparts, because these one-off events, one-off actions actually help the causes of these NGOs that work continually. So these are basically just two types of online activism which are complementary. Whether online activism is included, for example, discussion on a news web or web of a daily newspaper, well, very liberally said, perhaps yes, but only in certain specific cases where really the member of the participant of the discussion really cares for change or proposes a solution or proposes to inform people. We can find these elements also there, but I'm not sure what's the percentage of the full volume of those discussions. Petra, how do you see online activism from your perspective? In practice, in our Consumer Protection Association, these online tools are slightly in the background because the target groups are usually older people, older aged people. And how I understand online activism or online citizen activism is very well evident on the cause. Maybe you've heard about it. The cause, it was called the cause of 60 euro invoices, where people were registering on a number of websites, and with these registrations they were actually concluding contractual relationships unaware. And there was a group of people on the internet, there were thousands of people who got registered, got trapped on this website and got registered. One of these people affected created a certain group, or he opened a discussion, and he offered, from his position, one of the affected persons, he opened the possibility of sending legal powers to all the affected people. He started activities to prepare legal cases. So he was preparing for these cases in a legal level. He was a simple person. He was a student, and by not hiding himself and trying to pull out these people from all small towns and villages across Slovakia and put them together, he was basically the only person who was willing to shout and use his voice to say not to the people not to pay these invoices. And institutions started to argue whether these people should pay or should not pay. And he was basically the only one who came into the daylight, and he became kind of a leader of this group. And this affair is already being treated at the courts. It's being dealt with, and really just the pure fact that a large number of people came together, associated, and they were able to mobilize themselves without any help of the state. So that was the example of citizen activism. Perhaps I could add on something. Speaking of online activism, in my perception, really, if we speak about activism, online activism cannot work without the offline component, because then it's just you know, for me, online activism must work with a grassroots offline activism. And, you know, just the fact that you said that this person you mentioned was doing some legislative steps and measures. So the online activism was the dimension that he helped to spread the word across the country. But there must have been this legal offline consultancy that he actually was applying. And what Filip was saying, there was an association that came to my mind, totally different story. The space where we're sitting, I'd like to say that this online activism also includes startups that perhaps are not focusing on business, but rather for philanthropy or activities related to help society in general. And some of these were presented in the Restart events, and we have had experience with this in our alliance. We've been organizing an event called Hack Day, and people just came there. They suggested some prototypes of startups that could help to improve civil society, and it came to my mind in relation to what Filip said, because unfortunately I'm not sure if I can include this in civic activism fully, because these things usually don't have any follow-up. They're not realized until the full possible scope, and therefore perhaps these are just sort of pure online activities without having a link to real world. And by you trying this in a more systematic manner, perhaps for the first time we managed that also this part of people will.
As I'm listening, I can see two differences here. Are two poles of the same topic, two sides of the same coin. We not only want to change institutions and call for our rights, but the other point is also consumer viewpoint, which doesn't really deal with civil society and some unfairness or injustice, but it really perceives consumer rights. There aren't that many examples. This is a restricted community. So what's your viewpoint? Are you optimists? Is there a lot of this or not so much? So how do you see these two sides of the coin of civil activism? If I may, there is a strong tendency in Europe to protect consumers. And we have a lot of EU directives from EU that we are transposing in EU member countries into national legislation, and consumers really are well protected. Sometimes it looks like it's unjust towards service providers. It looks like they cannot intervene with the contracts they are engaged in. They may seem like a weaker part. On the other hand, the laws protect consumers much better. And then we have another aspect. A consumer has to know their rights. Consumers have to have very good knowledge of their rights in order to apply them in practice. Of course, there are consumer associations, but in our practice, we've also had projects focusing on patients' rights, and the basic premise is that a citizen is not only an object of treatment or a beneficiary. The patient himself should also be actively involved in their treatment in order to create partner relations with doctors, not just to passively accept some solutions and decisions. I may use an example of a student with oncological disease. A doctor prescribed some sort of treatment. However, the patient didn't feel well after this type of treatment, and she refused to accept to be a passive object of chemotherapy. Therefore, she started to write her diary, and she put notes on what is the impact of the treatment on her body, what are the physical, mental changes. And after a while, she showed the diary, and the doctor realized that maybe this treatment was good enough for 100 people prior to this patient, but this one really doesn't feel well, and it doesn't do her any good. So based on that, a form was created, and the hospital is now using a form which collects data about the patient so that the treatment can be more tailored. And this is what patients should realize. They are entitled to individualized type of treatment. So you mean that civil activism also means showing active interest in the services provided? Yes, what I understand is that we should not be passive. We should stand up for our rights. And you in Eva, you in Alliance of Fair Play, do you deal very much with data mining, for instance, or what is your perception of this activism of citizens? Hello? The original question was whether there is any difference between consumer and civil activism. Basically, yes, there is a difference, but for me, I am a person who tries to really work hard to improve the situation in Slovakia. To me, it doesn't make much difference. Apart from the fact that they are both trying to change the situation towards private sector, whereas the civil activism is trying to change something vis-a-vis public administration. So this is the major difference. But basically, both are beneficial. Whether we have enough of it in Slovakia or not, I think it's just about enough. This is one area which will correct itself. There will always be as much activism as the situation requires. This is something which you cannot do artificially if there is no urge. people respond differently to our projects. Everything is established in such a way that we are a small team of people. We have very similar backgrounds. Many people come from media, and then there is a large group of people who are politologists. I think we have another person to join our discussion, Filip Vagač. And in the community with which we work, it is a control of or a watchdog of state administration. We believe there are many things that we can try, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And sometimes they work in a way which we did not predict. So we then evaluate what we've achieved, and many times we just changed the perception of some topic by politicians because they came in touch with us. And sometimes we move layers that we did not expect to. Some of our projects are very ambitious, and the feedback is not so huge. Sometimes it works the other way around. When we collected money for Tom Nicholson, for instance, we believed he was in a very bad situation, and we believed he would have nothing to live on, and the response was so huge that we really we generated a huge amount, and that's very engaging. It is a commitment on the other side for Tom Nicholson. So sometimes it's very unpredictable, and that's what it's nice about it. Filip, if I may, how is the situation from your viewpoint? What is a success to you? Eva mentioned that there's a lot of initiatives around, but not all of them sustain. So what are your criteria to a successful example of online project? Just to add to previous question, civil activism and consumer activism, I don't think we should really divide these two topics because they are more or less the same. Just the ambition differs a little bit. And I would like to include here another area, and that is fundraising and a culture of giving. That's also important. And a question of what is successful online activism. I think there were many successful projects. Filip, we're talking about forms of online activism in Slovakia. So what it means to you, what is your experience with it? Thank you for the question. I would like to apologize. I needed to attend the prize giving of the award to volunteers, which is very much related to this topic. We've had 105 people who were proposed for this prize. So these were all activists and volunteers. So to answer your question, I think more and more we are deleting a border between non-for-profit sector as it was understood in the 90s, where there were organizations with clear structure and programs. So they were given grants from abroad and maybe some from the foundations in Slovakia. So that was clear. And there was a border between this third sector and the second sector, with which I've worked recently. Maybe you know an organization called Voices. And they picked 9 young people who came to talk about what they do with their lives, with their communities. They had no organizations, no program, and what they said was fascinating. You could hear the enthusiasm about what they do and what kind of track they are leaving in the environment where they live. So that was very thrilling. It seemed to me as though there is another third sector that's being created here. And the border between the third sector, which is organized, and the civil society, which is unorganized, is ceasing to exist. So there are many people around here who want to do something, and they find ways how to do it without any structural organization. And I find it great. I think that's giving us hope.
I'd like to follow up on you that one of the great advantages of the situation we are in is that the internet has strengthened this old sort of bricks and mortar activism, or offline activism, and now introducing any kind of activities is extremely extremely easier. And this is a way how to introduce new topics into public discussions, even the topics that perhaps wouldn't have been discussed a couple of years ago, because there were so few people in the past were interested in the very area, and they had problem to get in touch. And now they managed to get in touch, and it snowballed, and there's much more people. And the example of the projects that came to existence just like this, thanks to Facebook or any other social networks. For example, the Zelená hliadka activism, it's a green guard, to translate it. They are collecting waste from the streets, for example, and I've seen their statistics today, or maybe this week, how much waste they've collected, how much area they've cleaned, and they said it's more than 2,000 of huge bags of waste. It's voluntary work done over the weekends. People who agree on these activities over the Facebook. Another type of activity is a cycler coalition activity, which basically started to organize, if I remember well, together with the critical mass, which were activities like let's cycle together around the town without being organized by anyone. And when there's enough of us, they start listening to us. And these are the things that probably 10 years ago would hardly be manageable without the internet. As far as I understand this from your summary, that you probably want to say that the successful and good online activism always have to lead to activities in an offline space, because all the activities that you mention basically are not purely online. They always have some sort of end, or they lead to some offline activities. And to a great extent, I feel that you're speaking about young people. Am I right? Do I understand correctly that online activism in Slovakia is mainly young activism? Well, I think in this, I see a person here from Strečanský portal who decided to carry out civil surveillance of their public authorities, and it's a person who is a pensioner in pension age, and is very active. So I believe that even among these older people, there's a huge potential for getting involved. For some people, of course, there's a barrier that they would have to learn working with these means of technology. They are basically unknown for them. But this gentleman is a proof that it's not a problem. So perhaps I would say it's just a purely statistical piece of information or piece of data. But I think later on will come, because all the people basically know more and they have more time. And I believe that they want to get involved. So I don't see this as a huge problem. I don't think that the border goes across the age categories. I think it goes across the internal mindset that I either believe that it's worth it and I can change things, or I don't. And this is basically the decisive characteristic that people say that I tried something, I did what I could, but it doesn't make sense anymore, it's not worth it. And often when a person thinks that it makes sense and it is worth it, they succeed. But I don't think this is age related. I think that older people can do it this well. So I think it's internal mindset. If you either believe that it makes sense to do something and that you can influence something. I think people who get involved in the activities of your association, or they react to what you say or what you do. Who are these people? Can you kind of demographically characterize these people? Well, our consumers that we associate, basically there is perhaps more people who are middle-aged or older-aged, because young people basically they know how to deal with these problems themselves. Also perhaps because they are better at working the internet, they can easier get to these regulations and laws that concern them in relation to consumer rights. And the older people are perhaps not as clever, so that's why they contact us. But we've worked with the various daycare centers and nursing homes this year, and it's interesting to watch these people, because there's always one or two of them who will take their time, they read a 20-page contract, and these individuals become ambassadors of their group or their village or the community or the daycare center or whatever. And these are the people who sort of push the information further on, and they mobilize these other old-age persons so that they could. He's basically a consumer ambassador, right? Okay, let's move on to the second area. That's the alchemy of success, or the alchemy of good online projects, because as we often say, not every good idea can be put in practice, and always a good idea is not enough. So what do you think you need for an online project that try to involve people in some sort of activities? What these projects need to succeed, except for good idea perhaps, or good cause? Well, for sure, the first point is having offline strategy prepared well, or offline communication, or offline operation. And Eva basically confirmed this, and I've seen a number of applications, websites of Facebook events, profiles that had a great energy at the beginning. So at the beginning they were very strong, and then later on they basically died out, and they got lost, and you can't hear about them now. So the alchemy, at the start you really need a strong team of people with a clear vision what you want to do and what you want to achieve perhaps, and then online is basically just a means, just a space for communication. Is not the base itself, in most cases, of course. Eva, any comments from you? Petra, if you want to react to this question, do you agree with what was said? Well, you know what, I'd probably look at it from a different perspective. Basically, you turn this around. Like, of course, there must be some idea, and like, what's the idea? What does it take to make the idea successful? Is to make this idea successful. But I still believe, despite what you've said, I think the idea is the core of the thing. And as long as the idea of what this respective person wants to get, and if it really is based on a very strong desire that many people identify with, I mean, however badly you program this, however ugly this looks, if you have this ending moment, like I click here and something may change, then it's great. And I think people are willing to go there. Then, and everything else is basically icing on the cake. You know, okay, you must keep it simple. It shouldn't be too complicated to understand. So the website or the profile should work in some ways. These are the nice things, nice to have. However, I really do think that we should not get detached from what's at the very beginning. I'd slightly disagree. Because today we have a tendency to believe that technology, in a certain way, will resolve on our behalf the interpersonal relationships. Or it may start up something, but I think we should differentiate the successful and the less successful, and that the point of differentiation is that there's a certain community, there's a group of people that in the end will overlap from the online, well, reach out from the online space to the offline space. And because if you only stay in this online space, in the end, you cannot exist there. You need to actually touch the people physically, or I mean, not literally, but you mean meeting people offline. I think that's the reason why people do it. Like, you get the added value which touches their lives, and of course, the starter, the stimuli. The stimulus is the online space, which actually brought the added value that hadn't been here before. Well, was maybe here, but very, very weakly. And it took much more to create this. Perhaps we do not disagree. Maybe I just didn't make myself clear. I want to stress that. I'm afraid it's myself who do this. So Filip emphasized the need for infrastructure, people who will pull it, who are pulling the project so that it wouldn't die out. I said the same basically in the beginning. Maybe I would disagree or contradict myself, that I think these activities will last as long as is necessary. When these activities die out, perhaps the issue is not so hot. And it's a natural process, or perhaps the perception of the whole issue, or the whole affair, whole cause, moved a bit further on. So I basically agree with what both Philips said here. And what you miss about Slovak civil online activism, or online activism in general, we've said that basically it's appropriate the way it is. So perhaps the way it is, it's good. But is it really so? Do you feel that things are as they should be, or do you think they should be better, or they should be organized a different way? And if you do, then how? Well, if I may start. Well, we live in the eastern part of Slovakia, so we basically live in a different world than Bratislava is. And the will of people to be active citizens, or the trust, the belief that you actually can change something, is basically getting weaker and weaker the further you go from Bratislava to the east. And especially among the older people, who, as if, well, we've seen this, the gorilla-related protests, because the older people often said to us, well, they're not going anywhere, because they've done this in the 1989, and they don't believe that they, from their position, or just purely from being active, could actually change something. So I don't know the recipe to formulate this, but really, some activities in the east are not as strong as those in Bratislava, especially speaking about the older people. So sorry that I'm taking the microphone again. I don't believe this is only a problem of outside Bratislava, or that it would increase in intensity the further you get from Bratislava. I don't think so. I don't think this online activism in Slovakia would be missing something. I would say that the civic awareness in Slovakia is perhaps not so strong. I believe we have so many activists as much as our civic society requires. But people could have more drive to change things when they don't like something. Because I still think that compared to what I get in touch with abroad, I think that we still let the authorities to tickle our noses, if you know what I mean. I mean, it's basically, we need a generation change. Perhaps our children or our children's children will have their mindset different, perhaps, in these terms. Perhaps I would follow up, and I would say that persistence basically brings this, that the things are kind of followed through, and they got changed from the activist dimension to the dimension that basically allows the people to work on everyday basis, and these activities then brings something that was basically born out of this activist environment. However, and we'll turn these things into a standard, or something that is a natural component of a community. And that's the thing that requires much more energy than just the original enthusiasm and zeal. And we need think about how to maintain the momentum, or maintain the change. And I think that this is not just an issue of activism or online activism, but it's an issue of a civic society in Slovakia as such. And it's a thing that's very strongly related to how people perceive civic society, and how we set up the conditions for functioning of civic society. It means what country do we live in the sense of how we actually perceive civic society, whether speaking of the authorities or the value system of people as such. We'll of course very soon get to the issue of the citizen-state relationship, or the relationship between the citizen and the state, and the digital nature of this relationship. But before that, I'd like to ask you about how do media and NGOs or online activist space, how do they communicate, or how they don't communicate? How does it work? What kind of relationship this is? Because media play a role of a certain, basically a watchdog, because they show the mirror, they reflect the public goings on and the things that are happening in the public space. And perhaps the organizations like Fair Play Alliance basically are trying to do the same. And any other type of activism that is trying to bring people to force people, make people to show their opinion somehow, despite the fact that the same objective, there are two different spaces, two different areas. How does it work? How do you look at this? What, for example, this area, what makes specific and interesting this area of online space? Sorry, civil space for the media, and how the media could actually be useful for the activities which are conducted by online civil activists.
It is very much related to the previous question, what I miss, and maybe it is also communication with media, but we can look at it from a different viewpoint. I like professional approach, not in the third sector that has been doing this for a long time, which is a know-how, but I like professional approach in various amateur activities which are not well thought through. They don't really know what they want to achieve and how. And I don't want to be very strict, but they sometimes use very populist mottos, and they drag a lot of people behind. And what happens is that if someone who has know-how wants to do something similar, has difficulties doing this because people remember this bad example. And I've mentioned Gorilla, and there are other protests and activities which only work on Facebook. So it's difficult to say what is the relationship between media and amateur activities, because we have to be careful to avoid advertising, promotion. We don't know who stands behind, and if there was a protest, we didn't have much information about it. So in this segment, it is full of emotions, especially from the other side, where independent news are required. So that's good that it exists, because media are not perfect. Journalists and activists are good and bad, smarter and less smart. So I believe the institutionalized activism, it has enough space. I think there is enough communication existing with Alliance of Fair Play and other institutions that we've worked with on many projects. I think that works well. It's mutually advantageous, and I think everybody benefits. And that's interesting what you're saying, because I think persistence and long-term sustainability increases the chances for success and increases trust in behavior. And you were also saying that some activities just burn for a while and then they burn down and stop. People are then disappointed because some expectations have not been met and people lack some long-term prospect. But that's usually what we should expect. The media space is very small, very short, several lines, and that's probably not going to change. What can we do about it? I think that's just a fact that we will have to live with. I just will conclude by saying that I don't think it's significantly worse than in surrounding countries, because amateur activities are good. I'm glad they exist. I agree. I believe it's good the way it is because of the enthusiasm, the belief in what I'm doing is good. And just as well that we have this kind of activities, but we should start to think about the background, because if something really works, if something leaves the track and changes society, then it should be transformed from the small plant to a larger plant. I mean, an infrastructure. If the state creates conditions in which a smaller project can be extended or transformed into a larger one, and I'm not talking about finances here, then it is good. There should be a relatively easy way to extend a good project into the larger concept. And that can apply to legislative dimensions, financial dimensions, etc. Let's go smoothly to the third topic before discussion, and that is relation in this online space between a citizen and a state. You have mentioned that the environment is not ideal. It is not really helping or encouraging such activities. So how do you perceive the issue? Because you are part of the state infrastructure. So how do you perceive the relationship between a space which is online growing? It means the civil space. How does it look like from the view of petitions or some civil activities, web pages, and investigation and access to information, and preparedness of the other side of the coin, which is the public administration, to respond to these activities and be adequate partner, equal partner. So what's the relationship like? I'm on the other side for a while. But I believe we should talk in broader terms when it comes to online activism and preparedness of infrastructure to take over or support this issue by the government or the state. Then I think it's very limited. But there is a value problem in Slovakia because the state works as a mechanism which works well when it comes to economic sharing. The state is collecting our taxes and then the state distributes money. And we don't have mechanisms sharing power which would work so well, or participation on power. So therefore, a regular citizen should have tools with which they could intervene with the existing system. And it is important to what extent they have experienced something which was successful, something which worked well, and that is something that we miss in Slovakia. We don't have this type of experience. And that this is a broader problem. Something like this is existing. It is happening in Slovakia, but we need to experience more situations. So you are talking about relationship between a state and a citizen. Petra, you are coming across some state institutions in your agenda, surely. So what do you think? From our viewpoint, it doesn't really work well, because the institutions strictly adhere to the regulations, and the clerk is a word with a negative connotation in our society. I liked the opinion of Mr. Ščibrani, who told us during the age camp that in his municipality he is perceived as civil activist, but he doesn't like this word because from the viewpoint of state institutions, active citizens doesn't mean anything good. It just means someone who always bothers with some issues. So active citizen is something else, and they prefer this word. I would like to mention project called Cash Out. This was an application through which you can take photos of dump sites. And particular villages or municipalities should find owners of the dump sites in order to get rid of these places. And I've seen none of the dump sites being taken away. I was very glad when I saw this activity that we would get rid of these, but none of them really stopped to exist. And when I complained to district authority of district environmental authority, I received a feedback from the town where they told me that first I should have addressed municipality because they had problems by not acting, and they've received phone calls from regional authority, which is their superior, telling them off for not acting.
Well, I think that from the side of citizens and in relation to technology, that the state is trying to communicate toward ourselves as citizens. That's one thing. Well, come on, we're ready. We'll be very happy if you use them all. And we can see that there is some effort recently. And on the other hand, we are working in the area and we know where the problems are and the challenges. And to be totally honest, and yes, the state and the municipalities, they follow the law, and therefore the largest problem in this thing is to get these things in the law, to include them in the actual wording of the laws. That's the biggest problem, because for most of us who sit here are basically, these things are a standard. Many people are aware of basic programming, they know how to work with the computer, but when they try to put this into legislation, there are two major stumbling blocks. The first of them is rather stupid, and the other is almost that could even make you angry. The first thing is that we facing misunderstanding of technical issues from the side of the state administration. We're trying to explain that something should work in some way, and we really go to the very low level that we write them down a specification. We even went as far as we almost done the work for them, the work that should be done by the state authorities, and we told them, here, this is ready, just implement this. But it's not functioning because there's really some sort of, perhaps the state administrators or the clerks or the officers, as we call them, simply are not clever enough to understand this. The second issue is much graver, much more profound, because perhaps they don't want to understand, because technology or IT and these things are very popular in terms of state procurement, and they are very good, very specifically set up systems like what is being procured from whom, and the setup of these procurements is very clever, so that it is given to certain companies at certain volumes, and this is very difficult to overcome. But sometimes, I'm a terrible optimist. I'm a terrific optimist. I'm believing that we are step by step. We are really de-assembling this mindset. But I believe that citizens and the NGOs and news journalists are very happy that this is actually taking place, because I realized when the contracts were being published on the internet, I used to work in the media at that time, and partially I was already working in the Fair Play Alliance, and I thought, like, wow, when these things are online contracts, and they will not be using it, and I realized that they actually were using it, but they realized that the contracts actually are really put online. It's a great tool for them, and I'm very happy, terribly happy, that this was adopted without any major discussions, and journalists started to use this as a standard tool for investigative journalism, just like a commercial register or company register. Even though that it looks as it looks, we know that it has its minuses, but perhaps this would be a good springboard for you, Filip, also perspective in the area. What's basically being prepared? What are the projects that should help citizens to see better into the guts of the state, literally, and what the state actually does for them? You have something to say about this. Okay, I must react to something. Really, sometimes the word clerk is used as a derogatory term, I know, but we should differentiate even within the state administration, or the group of clerks, or however you call it. There are people who are very friendly toward these things that you mentioned and really want to help, and very often they do help. But it depends. You have to basically distinguish between this group and, of course, the other group, very large groups who consider modern technology to be a curse, and perhaps they don't like that the civic activists actually see into the things that they hadn't seen until then. And then there's another part that says that, yes, this will help us, that these things will actually facilitate working of state administration, that they're open to this and they support it, and they help to implement these steps. So I feel the urge to say that this is not a unique group, that you have to differentiate within this huge army of clerks. And when it comes to these activities, within the framework of the initiative of open government, which was the initiative was actually initiated by the Barack Obama, the US president, together with the other presidents, and the initiative basically brought a lot, and then now it includes over 60 governments of the world. It actually brought the new mode of operation that says that the state government is here to serve and to provide information to citizens, and actually the other way around, as it was when we were passing the Information Act, because looking at the Information Act, the citizen actually has to ask for any piece of information. And it's a tiring process for both parties, not just for the citizen, but also, you wouldn't believe how the clerks, the officers, they're exhausted, because there's so many requirements and inquiries and queries that it's really difficult to manage it. So the philosophy is turned upside down, and it says that the data which the state administration has available in their databases, and which are not secrets, well, why shouldn't they all be provided in the form that the citizens could work with, and the citizen is wise enough and clever enough to use various applications and tools or ways they decide about which information is important, relevant, necessary, etc., etc. And within working with this information, they do something that will be useful. And so that I'm not so general, I'll tell you, I use specific examples, for example, from the UK, which together with the United States is basically a pioneer in the area. And in the UK, they thought that, speaking of the cycling paths, they put together maps with the car accident rate that basically hadn't been in the databases before, but they basically overlapped and combined these two databases, and they found out which spots are the most dangerous spots for cyclists. And then they start to tackle these places or these locations so that they are not so dangerous, or actually they inform people to pay more attention when they're crossing these locations. And this was another affair, was a huge discussion, a huge public discussion that was publishing of the information, how many people have died during heart surgeries. The huge discussion was about the problem, that the issue that is basically a very private piece of information, it's morbid, it should not be published, this information is not public, the information should be kind of hidden in the respective hospitals. But in the end, it turned out that the chamber of surgeons who were actually conducting these surgeries agreed that they needed to clean this space, and it turned out that there was a chart of hospitals that with the highest mortality rate. They lost business immediately, but those who had been hidden in this huge mass and they had a high mortality rate, they actually stopped conducting surgeries, and it helped patients, helped the public, and it's evaluated as one of the most successful applications that actually was carried out just based on data that had been unavailable, and they made an application that used this data, and we could go on and on and on. We even see that it incredibly helps business in the given country when the government decides to make this data available. It creates lots of jobs, etc., etc. And is this going to happen here in Slovakia? Well, when it comes to the government decree, this portal of open data was established, and at this moment, at this stage, it is on the government website datago.sk, and now we're in the stage where we're actually fulfilling the respective database slots and files that will actually enable people to use the information which are available, and I believe that there will be applications being created that will be using the data which is available. Well, did someone calculate the economic benefit of these measures for the public budgets? Because I think I've seen somewhere on the internet, I've found analysis for the US government. What does this type of digital application or digitalization or effective use of the data in healthcare and public administration, etc., etc. These are huge figures, actually. Is there something like this in Slovakia? Something that we would know that these hundreds of millions of euros deficits, etc., etc., or well, not for sure. Not in Slovakia. We are in the stage of convincing the respective ministries or departments that this measure actually does make sense, and it's a thing that is good to be done. Because so far, not the full state administration is convinced that this is the way that has some future. So we're one step behind. We're trying to negotiate with the respective ministries, and we try to agree on a schedule of how these database files will be published gradually. We are at the figure of approximately 450 data sets, or databases, if you like. I firmly believe that we are getting to the situation where this portal will have this number of databases available, really publicly available. I'd like to add on
I know about a study which was developed based on this topic on European level. It was initiated by Commissioner Nelly Kroes, Commissioner for Open Data Agenda, but I'm very bad when it comes to figures. I can't remember the figure, but they've estimated that within several years' time, what would be the economic volume of open data business. So this particular example. And in terms of European budget, this was quite an interesting figure. I think you can find it on internet. So we have a question which we cannot answer right in the moment. Now I would give floor to your questions. Do you have some different viewpoints or questions you'd like to ask? We have about 35 minutes. Mics? Please introduce yourselves. Miroš Čibrani. I'm from Strečanský, a portal which also was a part of a competition of open portals. When it comes to active citizenship, I chose the local government, and if I don't want to work with impressions only, I need data. There are data on the municipal level, such as the web page and information system. And to get information from web page is not difficult if the data are available. But data are not always in the form which is eligible and comprehensive, so it's quite difficult to work with data often. That's the first problem of active citizens. The second issue is that if on the web page there aren't data, then apart from the law 211, there is no mechanism based on which we can get the data from municipality. The municipality listens to the law 211, so usually when we require some data, we get them, but that's very labor intensive. It would be ideal to cooperate with clerks, and I agree that many of them are very willing to cooperate, and not all of them are unwilling. So that's quite fine, but if you want to go over the horizon of the municipality, then we need data from a level above, and there we have problems. I personally know 3 databases which may be useful to us, and my question is about these 3 databases. The first one I learned about is DataNet by Fair Play Alliance. We found interesting data there. But there we have a problem because the database is not updated as it should be. We find historical figures, but we cannot find latest figures usually. The second database, potentially useful, is a data center database that's from the Ministry of Finance, but that's a problem. We wouldn't get the data even thanks to 211 because we would have to go through the Ministry of Finance. And the third one that I only know that it will grow that is data.gov.sk. And my question now is whether there is a plan to connect this data. Will there be some sort of cooperation between Data Nest and data.gov.sk and Data Center? Could we look forward to something? Well, I hope yes, but not on the governmental level. When it comes to changing the basic philosophy, the database should be available to citizens. That's a gradual process. It is happening on the level of state administration, and here the government can intervene. And of course, we can say openly that we are in the first stage, and these were the data sets that the government is ready to make available. And we know that there are further database sets that weren't considered as being part of Open Portal. And this is the level of state administration. And here the government cannot really do anything. And that is local government. Local government is independent of the state administration, so they create their own standards. Of course, we want this to work as an example, a role model, which can be replicated. And there are municipalities which would welcome this more open system, but not all of them. And just to go back to your question, some linkage. I hope this connection or linkage should not be intervened by the government. It should be something which will work based on citizens' efforts. Citizens should think what to do with them. I will use the data and I will create something that will be very useful for others. And you are right that it should be done by computers. It shouldn't be done by people. So the machine asks for data, compares the data, and needs no human intervention because it would be so labor intensive. So in order for it to be in such form, I think the available data will be a source of ideas for people. And I think it will bring about the pressure which was exerted in all the other countries, such as United States, because it just proved to be so important and helpful that people will make good use of it.
Veľmi by tomu pomohlo, ak by napríklad databáza.
I think it wouldn't help that much if the database in data centers became public immediately. So it would help very well. It's something that we desire for a number of years. But to answer your questions when it comes to Data Nest, and for the others, just to give you context, Data Nest is a service of Fair Play Alliance that has attempted to substitute the state in the proactive publication of data. Already at that time, where state did not do that, when all the data was available upon request through the extension 211. And we in Fair Play Alliance decided to ask the state proactively for the data, and we'll be publishing the data proactively so that the other people wouldn't have to contact the state, but they would just go to our website. And unfortunately, Mr. Vagač was Mr. Shibrani was the unlucky person to be activist in his own municipality, which was providing most data on paper, only on paper, which is very difficult to process. But I have good news for you. It's all been scanned and now it's available online, all these papers. And okay, when it comes to the linkage, I admit DataNest was basically supplementing the role of the state in the areas where state used to fail in the past, not now, but it used to be a big failure in the past. And I believe that it would be great if DataNest was not necessary, if the state started to fulfill its role in this area so well that no NGO databases would be necessary. But I'm afraid we still have work to be done for a couple of years. But please do hurry, we'll think of something else to do, don't worry. Another question? My name is Juraj Hrapunov from UN Development Program. I have two questions, not very much connected. One of them is to Mr. Vagač with regards to the data. What time horizon are you actually speaking about at this case? Because I've been watching this data portal for the past one and a half year, and at the beginning there were 23 datasets, and now there's 37 datasets, out of which open data license file is just one, as the list of mineral springs in Slovakia. So I'm very much interested when all these hundreds of datasets you mentioned will be online. And the second question is to all panelists: how do you define what is online activism that you were speaking about at the beginning? Like, what is activism, what is not activism? For example, anonymous activities, are these activities? Is it activism, or is it something that is basically subject of criminal prosecution? And you were only speaking about the activities of civil society, like tidying up the municipal waste and things like that. Okay, I'm not sure exactly which portal you're speaking about, because the datago.sk portal that I was talking about, the right to establish this portal was the government decree number 50, the 22nd February 2012. And if you know the situation in Slovakia, you know what happened right after that. That means one of the last decrees of the government of Iveta Radičová. Then there were elections, pre-major elections. But despite this fact, we managed. Okay, I won't go into details about what's been going on to actually put this portal in the existing form, so that the website address actually had some content. So for half a year it stood no chance to exist. Speaking out this year, and it took time to actually acquire a software solution that enables these things, and this was followed by, I'm not sure how much experience you have, what happens when the government decrees actually adopted, how the execution in practice actually takes place, or how much it takes place. And there are people from our office, and the communication with other ministries until you actually reach the agreement that these are the files that we own. I'm not speaking about those which are available but were not offered. And the second communication, that these are the files that we are willing to publish on the portal. And the third, this is the schedule within which we are actually willing to do that. And the fourth level, we are willing to go to attend a training where you explain us the standards, technical standards, etc., etc. Because, you know, offering just a pure link on the website, well, where's the problem? These dialogues were taking place permanently for a long time. But to answer your question, there are basically 2 or 3 waves which are set up. The first wave took place in October, this October. That means very short time ago. So guess how many ministries sent what they were actually supposed to send? Well, not many. And the second wave will be taking place in March, so that we are basically pushing and forcing the resorts to the ministries to send us the data that they actually were supposed to send us. So there's a commitment. We need to really encourage all the ministries, but I do believe that the number will be rising. And the legal framework, when it comes to the initiative, that was adopted for 1 year, the Open Government Initiative. So basically there's obligation until the June 2013 to publish this on the portal, on the website. In what form there remains to be seen, but this is the essential framework. The second question was, so what is not online civic activism? Well, what are the borders of civic activism? Well, that's the very difficult question to answer, because we answered your question at the beginning in a very broad sense. It's difficult to define something that is not. And for me, it's any kind of activity that tries to change our environment. Any kind of activity is a civil activism for me, whether it's a status on Facebook or anything. I've been following blogs as a means of civic journalism. So civil journalism itself, blogs, and maybe not when you're writing about little kittens, but any kind of blog that informs people about things that are going on, or comment something. All these blogs are basically part of civil journalism, and civil journalism is a form of civic activism. But I do not dare to comment what is not civil activism. Well, you perhaps, if I understand correctly, the end of the question, whether something which potentially can be criminally prosecuted still can be civil activism. The answer is I do not know, but let me give you an example that I'm thinking about. The Czech art group Stohoven, which you perhaps noticed recently through the explosion of atomic bomb in Krkonoše in the Czech mountain range. After they hacked us, one camera, they actually showed it online on the state TV, and last time they carried out an event which is called Moral Reform, and they published all phone numbers of all MPs and they started to send text messages to these phone numbers at the time where there were discussions of these huge corruption cases that Karel Schwarzenberg is writing to her colleague, like it's time to think about how we do politics and it's time for moral reform, etc., etc. So there were approximately 500 text messages within the network of the Czech parliament. Actually, no politician was actually really thinking about moral reform, but there was a huge buzz going on, and both of these activities were basically beyond a certain border, what we consider as decent. And the camera hijack of the live panorama actually went as far as to the court, and perhaps the Stohoven group actually lost the case. I'm not sure now, but we got now into the limits. What is actually criminal and what is not criminal? To take away the phone numbers of politicians and carry out a civil intervention. Well, perhaps I'm in the more extreme wing of the opinion spectrum, but I still believe that this is civil activism. Even though when the situation is so bad that you need to push, really, in some way, in a way that perhaps goes beyond the standard limits. But on the other hand, it should not. I mean, it shouldn't lead to any kind of damage. I mean, as long as going beyond the borders is perhaps going beyond the borders which do not make sense, I would say it's still kind of okay. We could still speak about civil activism, but if we go beyond, further on, I would start to think whether this person is trying to achieve decent operation of the state. I would question whether these people should go further than this. Philip, any comments? I'll follow up, if I may. This relates to, well, you as people will understand that the issue of data portal and the issue of how much it is perceived as a Slovak topic. I believe that despite the things we've been saying, what it should bring and what it could bring, the less professional part of society do not understand it very much, what actually is going on. And it seems that the more professional, more technically competent part of society doesn't speak about it that much, and there's no sense of pressure or sense of demand, if you like, something that would say that if something like this happened, it would be nice. This is basically a challenge for the audience here. That maybe it would make sense to start speaking about the fact why something like this, doing something like this in Slovakia does make sense. Why this setting from the info, from the mindset of the act of information to the mindset of state offering the information and data, why it actually makes sense to support it and to ask for certain data sets from the respective ministries. We really like to have this because we're doing this and this. You know, this data center is not in the first wave. We all know that the data exists, but it wasn't in the first primal offer. And if it suddenly happened that this data set is the subject of interest of a major part of the public, it will certainly influence the reactions and thinking at these ministries that something like this really makes sense, does make sense, and what we actually do with it. Let me be a bit skeptical in this, but yes, you're right, I agree. But looking at the things like what this society lives with, I, myself, as a moderator of discussion, take the liberty of being more careful when it comes to my expectations, but I do not lose the belief. If there's any question in the audience?
Hello. My name is Zuzana Šembrenová. I'm here on my own behalf. I would like to discuss a division of civil and consumer activism. Why do we divide between citizens and consumers? We're all people. And if we use consumer activism as a leverage, it would also help us to get more pressure on open data. I can tell my own example. I used to work as entrepreneur. I was a freelance and I was very happy to cancel my entrepreneur's license because I no longer have to go to tax authority and health insurance authority. Why shouldn't we have just one contact point for all of these institutions? And I recalled that this was a scandal some time ago. And I'm very close to claiming from the state that they should tell me where they invested their money or my own money that I gave to the state. And I'm not an active citizen, really, and people are very egocentric. That was my commentary. I think I've introduced the division, but that was just a theoretical thought. I myself didn't really know whether there is a difference, and I concluded that probably there is no difference, that we are all citizens, and it doesn't matter in what area we're exerting pressure. Maybe we have 50 chances, we can try 49 chances and see whether it works when we try 50th time. And it probably doesn't matter whether it is consumers area or whether it is an authority where we want to achieve something. It's not really about online activism. It's about the awareness raising of our citizens, and that we need to do a lot in order to increase awareness in any area. And if I may add to consumer issue, I think our project of the blacklist is a good example. The data are available on the webpage of Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Economy. However, there are so many data that if a poor person wants to find just one particular data, he would spend a lifetime searching through it. So that's why we're coming up with an idea for a search machine which will help citizens to find the particular data. And the initiative came from a consumer area because consumer contracts are very typical and they can be very well differentiated from other types of contracts. During the gala dinner last week, when we presented the project related to consumer contract, the mayor of Banská Bystrica came to us, telling us that he likes it. He wanted something similar to be used in Banská Bystrica as a part of a public procurement process. So he took this idea and maybe he used it on a different or higher level. So I think that's good. These things should influence themselves and evolve. Yes, contracts are a very good example. I have one experience of this kind from the last week when it comes to publication of contracts. When government started to openly publicize contracts, we were so happy. We will have tens of thousands of contracts, and that would be it. We will find the proof that we need. And we created a web page to sort it out. And then we have various other projects we're working on. And as a part of one project, we are communicating with a consultant. So we give him contracts to read them, and we want his opinion whether they are advantages or disadvantages. And last week we asked him whether he uses open contracts portal. So we just needed to know whether the person who is a watchdog uses this portal. And he says, yes, of course I use it. And they are working with some construction company, and he wanted to check the contracts for the installation of houses, and he found out that they have lousy contracts. So this is the purpose of it. The citizens realize very well how the system should work, so we shouldn't force anyone. People will find out for themselves how to use the portals. Just be patient. Hopefully we'll have more good purposes than bad ones, because there was also a question of bad purposes. But we will not influence that. We will be optimistic. Do you have any further questions? Hello, Igor Polakovic from the Center of Philanthropy. I love fundraising. And I just wanted to point out to what online world can open as a part of consumer activism. Now we can very easily use just a credit card and chip in for a very good thing. Usually it's a very good purpose that the state does not contribute to, such as a collection of money for Tom Nicholson or Susanna POC. And it's fascinating for me to see how people are chipping in huge amounts altogether for people who are potentially liquidated by the state. And this way they exert pressure on some problem in society. I think that's great. That wasn't a question, sorry. Any other opinion? I thought Igor would also talk about the issue of not being able to pay only via credit cards. It's called pledge. It's not possible in Slovakia so far. So we should start to talk about it in Slovakia. Why is it not possible? We're part of a European space, and we also claimed that soon it would be possible in Slovakia. So we should start a discussion. That's a comment too. If I understood correctly what Mr. Vagač said, then it seems as though Data.gov.sk will only contain data from public administration but nothing from the local administration? There will be data from state administration but not from public administration. The central administration bodies, it means ministries, will provide data from their database. No local, no regional government. But I was interested in learning whether some database would be created collecting data from local government. If you help me think about the ways in which you can force local government to be included in this project, I'm the first one to go for it. Because the local government is sovereign, independent, and the state has no influence over the local government, then we can only exert pressure as a part of bottom-up activity. But I can't find a tool. We probably won't be able to think about any tool here, but can active citizens start providing data to the state portal? Because they are often on the web page, but you need active citizens who will transform the data. Then you will be able to compare the data. There are active citizens like me, myself, who will be able to share them. And if I share my data, I want to have the ability to compare them with others. I offer this portal for such section to be created. Mr. Kapusz is administrator of this portal, and he can help us in creating something like this. And if there are local governments offering something like this, I think that would be great. This way we'll create precedents. If there is a crucial mass that you can generate, we can start off a great project. If you can provide this on behalf of Vagač or other municipalities or even higher regional units, that would be great.
Well, so far you can surely send the data to us. Or maybe both, if you like. Well, perhaps there's a space for the very last question, because we are pretty much out of time. So, if someone, moment of silence. Well, okay, then let me adjourn this. Let us conclude this discussion, this event. I'd like to thank Petra Vargová-Čakovská, Filip Vagač, Eva Vozárová and Filip Struhárik for the time they spent here with us and for sharing their insights into the topic. And I believe that perhaps this was inspirational for you, that we perhaps provided you with some stimuli, and see you next year. Another face-to-face event. We'll surely inform you soon enough about the date and location on our Facebook profile, or the Facebook profile of